Do you think sexism played a role in that campaign?
Do I think so? I have no doubt that it did, that it was
decisive. In other words, if Hillary Clinton had been a man, she would have won that election going away.
There's so many things that might have been decisive, but that was a major factor.
One of the craziest things about politics is that weird stuff happens. And when weird stuff happens, everybody assumes that it's going to happen the same way again the next time because, well, you know, history repeats itself. What the saying says, history doesn't actually repeat itself, but it does rhyme. And so when something strange happens, there's a tendency to assume that the same thing is going to happen again. It wasn't 5 years ago when we went through this whole thing with replacing a Supreme Court justice, and it didn't happen. Matt, the lawyer, and I did a show called Merrick Garland Can't Lose. Of course, it was all predicated on this idea that Hillary Clinton couldn't lose the election. I mean, I know, looking back at it with hindsight, 2020 hindsight, everybody goes, "Whoa, we got that wrong." But at the time, there were very, very, very few people, none of whom were considered to be serious in any way, shape, or form, who gave Trump a chance at winning. You know that, and I know that. So it really made sense at the time. In retrospect, it didn't. But there was another thing going on there that we don't really talk about in that 2016 election. I have always enjoyed reading Ruth Bader Ginsberg's dissents. She had a razor-sharp wit, enjoyed the opera. As you know, she was good friends with Scalia. It doesn't mean that I agree with anything she had to say. But post-2016, there was a real bitterness to her that she didn't get, how do I say this politely? She got excused for it, in a sense, where other people were seen to be, very angry and the likes of that. I think Ruth Bader Ginsburg was every bit of that. But because she was a Supreme Court justice and because she was so put on a pedestal, which I still don't understand, no Supreme Court justice should ever be put on any pedestal for any reason, there tended to be an excusing of her language and her bitterness that you wouldn't normally see in other cases. Part of the 2016 calculation, though, and part of her bitterness, I guess, was with Hillary's loss, there had been a great deal of pressure, a great deal of suggestion. There are rumors that even President Obama met with her to try to convince her to resign to step down before while they still had the chance to replace her with someone acceptable to the political left. But she wanted to be replaced by Hillary Clinton. She wanted to be replaced by a woman. And so she never got that chance because the gamble, you're taking a chance, and she took a chance and she lost. But there was a lot of discussion around that time about how she screwed up because she hadn't done that. Maybe Trump doesn't get his 3 conservative, quote unquote, appointees to the Supreme Court. And so you have this Ruth Bader Ginsburg effect now where people are thinking strategically, who's going to die, who's going to do this, who's going to do that, and how do we make sure that we get to replace them as opposed to they get to replace them because, they're not going to do it right. The calculations with the Senate. And of course, it's almost bemusing right now and I don't know why. A year it's an eternity in politics, and 2 years is even longer when you think about it. A year ago, when they were impeaching President Trump, every conservative chat show host in the country was talking about, hey, thanks, you just reelected. Remember the memes? Hey, you just reelected Trump. Way to go. Did it work out that way? No. But there is this presumption now that because of some of the things that are going on, that it's going to be very difficult for the Democrats to maintain control of the Senate, which they don't really have, but with the tiebreaker vote. And the House has gotten ever closer and could be in danger, meaning that in 2 years, they won't be able to appoint whoever they want to the United States Supreme Court should a vacancy arise. And so there's this feeling now that we need to do something now. Well, the problem is, of course, Supreme Court justices are appointed for life or until they decide to retire. Ruth Bader Ginsberg, in many ways, threw wrenches into the monkeys of that whole set because she didn't step down when she probably should have, and because she, again, wanted to be replaced by Hillary Clinton, and ended up essentially, screwing that whole thing up if you happen to be of the Democrat persuasion. If you're not, then you're rejoicing. But you have the same problem in reverse, don't you? Some of those conservative justices are getting up there in age too. And believe me, there's nothing that Joe Biden would like more than to replace one of those conservative justices if he got the opportunity to do so. That said, however, there has to be some strategic thinking here. And much of the discussion, much of the rumor mill now, is that Justice Breyer, even Breyer, the three liberals on the court, is probably going to retire at the end of the session this year. There's some reasons for that. There's some thinking for that. And of course, this would be welcome news to the Biden administration. I know that sounds strange. We're losing a reliable liberal justice. Yeah, but those are literally a dime a dozen. I mean, you can't swing a dead cat on a 3-foot string without hitting a dozen or so liberal judges, who could become liberal justices. So it's not that big of a deal to them. Biden, on the other hand, has made a campaign promise, and I know he made a lot of campaign promises, some of which he'll keep, some of which he will not keep, to, in many ways, the same as he did with his vice presidential nomination. He was kind of trapped with that because he promised a certain thing. And the problem with doing that is you limit yourself and the choices become narrowed. In other words, do I pick the best person, or do I pick the person who meets these criteria? Ching, 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 ching. And in his case, he wanted the criteria more than the best person. I don't think you'd get any reasonable argument from anybody. Kamala Harris was not the best candidate for vice president. She did check off some boxes, and that's what they really wanted. Can't really say she was a good candidate for this because literally the only person to get less votes for her in the primary was Zero Inslee, who's pissing people off over here right now because he's reopened the state in the areas that he won in the election. The areas that he didn't win, that have lower rates and lower, roughly equivalent metrics, did not open. And it's smacking of politics right now, and there's some pissed off people around here right now, and I'm one of them, but that's a story for another day. Anyway, the president, Biden, has promised that he will appoint a black woman to the Supreme Court of the United States. Look, I haven't gone through the whole list of candidates because, for one thing, he never released his list of candidates that I'm aware of. So we don't know who's on that list. I think we can safely assume that whoever is on the president's list is a hardcore leftist. And we just sort of assume that. They probably wouldn't be nominated if they weren't. It's part of the whole deal with this, right? I mean, he's not going to nominate somebody that's not eye to eye with his vision on this. It's possible. I mean, the man might have a stroke or something and forget who he is, but the reality of it is he isn't choosing it anyway. Being chosen for him, he's just making the announcement. The interesting thing about this, though, to me, is the way that official Washington, D.C., not the state, is really just assuming. I mean, you can go online, look this up. You can look it up yourself. It's on the internet. The way that we're just assuming that Breyer's going to retire because they want him to, and they learned, I guess, a lesson. They think they learned a lesson from the old situation with RGB not stepping down when she should have because she wanted a specific thing, and it blew up in their faces. Well, I still think they're hoping that something will happen and one of the conservative justices will go away, and then Breyer retires, and then he gets two. Who knows? I mean, this is a hell of a way to run a railroad where everything is just undoing what your predecessor did with very little legislative input anyway. It will be intriguing to see, again, what the Republican response in Senate judiciary hearings will be, given the Kavanaugh fiasco. I doubt very seriously that the Republicans wouldn't want the political optics of being seen to attack a black woman. In fact, they'll probably be fawning over themselves to approve her because she's a black woman, and there will be very little substantive discussion of whatever her positions are on the Constitution. Just reality, folks. I mean, Republicans they're not going to question her about those kinds of things. Some might, but as a general rule of thumb, it ain't going to happen. Which is, of course, the whole lesson of the RGB situation is, get it done while you can, get it done while you should, because if you don't, well, never know just what might happen.